Literary Festival. This is presented in partnership with McKinsey, and thank you, Raju, for being here and making it happen. We are pleased to have you all with us for this conversation on how talent and leadership shape contemporary American life at both individual and organizational levels. And our first author is, the person I'm going to introduce first, is Meenakshi Ahamed. She examines this in the Indian Genius, the Meteoric Rise of Indians in America. Through reporting and first-person accounts, she traces how Indian Americans have gained prominence in technology, medicine, public policy, and the factors that have shaped their paths over the past few decades. Welcome, Meenakshi. Great to have you. The author number two, by no means in stature, but just the way I'm introducing, is Vik Malhotra. He offers a leadership view in his book, A CEO for All Seasons, Mastering the Cycles of Leadership. He draws on conversations with CEOs around the world, and he explores how leadership demands change and how executives adapt to those shifting conditions. And guiding this discussion is Liaquat Ahamed. Welcome, Vik. Welcome, Professor. I'm just going to call you Professor because that's how I always looked up to you. He's the author of one of my favorite works of nonfiction, which is Lords of Finance. He's a Pulitzer Prize recipient whose work traces the interplay of individual decisions in global finance, global forces in finance, and history and policy. So a huge round of applause and welcome. Meenakshi Ahamed, Vik Malhotra, and Liaquat.
Do I have to press anything, or does it go?
There's a little knob here.
Where do I press? Okay, great. Thank you. You don't have to call me professor. I'm not a professor. I just have a beard. So I think we're here for a very interesting discussion because we have two people who know an awful lot about their subjects. Vik has been at McKinsey for 40 years?
Almost.
Okay.
39.
Okay, almost 40 years. And has written 2 books about CEOs. And Meena has spent the last few years analyzing and thinking about the Indian diaspora in the US and has strong views. In addition, I should say that she's my wife. So I should come clean. So, starting out with Meena. As you point out in your book, Indian Genius, Indians in America have done exceptionally well, both in terms of income, education, wealth creation. So, talk a little bit about the origins of that, the historical roots of how Indians came to America and how well they've done.
Well, thank you. I have to say that Liaquat stepped in and is substituting. So I appreciate...
You mean I wasn't your first choice?
Well, thank you so much to IAC for doing this book festivals. I think it's just wonderful that you do this every year and have these wonderful authors coming. And thank you to everyone for being here. So Indians have come to the US in different ways, and the 60% of the Indians today, we're now almost 5.2 million Indians in the US. When I came in 1970, there were just 50,000. And, literally, for me to find another woman studying in a US university, it was really difficult. And, they increased to about 800,000 in the 1880s.
1980.
I mean, in the 1980s. But the real jump took place after 2000, after the tech, the Y2K boom. But just to jump back a little bit, the US immigration laws had been fairly discriminatory towards Asians, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act, and there was a handful of Indians who came when India was still a colonial, under colonial rule. It was Punjabis mainly, and mostly Sardars, and it was about 1,200 people in total, not much, and they came to California, to Northern California. There was a great deal of discrimination. They had to actually fight to become citizens. A couple of them had initially gained citizenship because they had worked, they had fought in World War II and World War I. If you do that, then you're given citizenship, and these people had fought in World War I, so they had fought with the Americans, come here, and they gained citizenship. But then it was rescinded because they said you were not white. And in those days, so there was a famous case called Hind versus the US. Some of you may be familiar with this, where he said that Indians are Aryans, so they should be considered white, and he was the judge was persuaded, gave him citizenship, and then it was rescinded again. He got citizenship twice in 2 different states, and both times it was rescinded. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the guy who was fighting his case was an Indian guy married to a white woman. And when they discovered that, he not only did Hind lose his case, but the lawyer lost his citizenship and his wife. Because in 1907, if you were an American citizen and you married an alien, you lost your rights of citizenship and you lost your rights to land. So not only were you disinherited, you were disenfranchised. So what did some of these Indians do who didn't have access to their land anymore? What they did was some of them committed suicide, some of them left and went back to India. Remember, there are only 1,200, it's like a handful. And then some of them put the names of their properties with white neighbors, and hoping that the laws would change and they would get it back. In some cases, the neighbors were really honest and held onto the properties for them. In some cases, they took off and they never got their properties back. They lost them, and they lost everything. Then several years later, about 20 years later, he was granted citizenship, and the laws were changed. But it took a while, and so there was this kind of muddy little history way back, in the 1920s, of Indians trying to establish themselves here, a sort of little foothold, and it was a sort of untidy history. So fast forward to 1965, President Johnson passes the Medicare Act. All of a sudden, 20 million Americans are now eligible for health care, but there's a shortage of doctors. The AMA, in all its wisdom at that point, then reduces the number of people that can go to medical school. So there's a shortage coming into medical school. There's this huge influx coming into the healthcare system, and Vietnam happens, and they need to ship doctors to Vietnam, and a lot of injured people coming in. So the whole medical community was freaking out, saying, where are we going to get the staff? So they went and started to recruit in places like India, English-speaking countries who had a history of educating, people well. And so India had a reputation of having good medical institutes. This was Nehru's vision, and so they started recruiting. That was on the domestic front. On the international front, there was another compelling reasons to bring Indians in, and that was Sputnik happened. And when Sputnik happened, the Department of Defense went into, there was an emergency there. They said, oh my gosh, the Russians are going to win the Cold War. We need to bring in engineers. They poured money into MIT, Stanford, all these universities up and down the East Coast, but there weren't enough engineers. Also, 9 million people going to Vietnam. Think about that, and so many young people. So they were losing all those kids who could be potentially studying medicine and engineering. So that was when IIT was graduating all these first-rate engineers. But India didn't have the absorptive capacity to give them jobs, and so it was a perfect supply and demand match. And they went and brought in all these engineers from India. So a very big influx started after 1965 when there was a great need from the US. I always tell people this because I've been asked recently, given the rising anti-immigrant tensions in this country, well, what do we say? I said, we were recruited. A lot of people who came in 65 and after, from 65 to 75, were actively recruited by the US government because, the US needed these skill sets. So, and that is why you see very highly skilled Indians also, as Liaquat mentioned, in the highest per capita income group, highest education group in this country, etc. Now, after Y2K happened, the bulk of Indians have come after that, and I think it went from a population of maybe 1.6 million, or it's in my book, don't hold me to that exact figure, but now it's 5.2. Everyone thought that Y2K is going to happen, their computers are going to shut down, they brought in another whole influx of Indians. So I'll stop there because that's those are the waves that came in. A lot of people in engineering, a lot of people in medicine.
So turning to Vik, the most distinctive thing about in Meena's book is how well Indians have done in corporate America. I mean, a remarkable number. Indians are disproportionately represented in the top ranks of the Fortune 500. You've studied a lot of CEOs. Is there something distinctive about the way Indians manage and their management style that accounts for their success?
Firstly, Vikrant, I should say, Meena, thank you. That was very illuminating. Before I heard you speak, my entire knowledge about the history of this was driven off an academic book written in 2016 called The Other 1% Indians in America.
It's a great book.
It's a great book.
Yes.
Yeah, but you have lots more interesting facts. That was very academic. I'm very excited to read your new book. This is going to be awesome. And that did give me a little bit of a sense of what happened in 1965 and how that opened the floodgates to allow for the legal inflow of Indians into America. But to your question, look, I think the trite answer is, many Indians in corporate America come with amazing education and an immigrant ethic to hard work. And that is all true. But I think what distinguishes some of these great Indian CEOs that have emerged in the S&P 500, and they go on and on. I mean, obviously in the tech world, you see Satya Nadella and Shantanu Narayanan and Sundar Pichai, Nikesh Arora, Arvind Krishna. But even beyond that, what Ajay Banga did at MasterCard, yeah, exactly. It's a long list of great leaders. I think the other thing that they did was they were really students of what does it really mean to become truly great leaders. And they put in the energy and the time beyond kind of their smarts and their education and their hard work ethic to really kind of understand what great leadership means. And in many ways it is a learned skill, or certainly some of it is a learned skill, and they put the energy into learning it. And I'll call out, when you kind of look at these great leaders, I'll call out 6 things that they particularly did that really just stood out for me, right? So the first is, there is this mindset among great leaders of be bold. And they epitomize the ability to be both bold and agile and manage risk at the same time, right? To me, one of the great examples is Ajay Banga at MasterCard. Ajay Banga took MasterCard, when he took it over in 2011, it was $17 billion in market cap. When he hands it off 8 years later, it is $325 billion in market cap. A 20x increase in market cap in an 8-year period. Just a remarkable story. But if you actually go to the heart of what Ajay did at MasterCard, he noted that everyone at MasterCard, all they did was talk about, beat Visa, beat American Express. Now we're going back to 2011, he goes, I looked out there in the world, and there was all 90% of everything was still in cash. And he came up with a two-word bold vision, which was kill cash. Kill cash. And he turned the entire organization to focus on how do we go after the cash opportunity, how do we build technologies to go do that, and really went after it in a big, bold way. And I thought that was great. Another leadership lesson that these great leaders pick up on is this notion of treat the soft stuff as the hard stuff. I mean, most of these great Indian leaders realize that if you're going to win, it isn't always about the strategy, that's important, but you've got to deal with culture and talent. And you see this with Satya Nadella in particular, right? If you talk to him, and I think Meena has talked to him for interviewing him for this book, when I talk to him, you really get this sense of, yes, the strategy was hard, but relatively speaking, that was easy. The hard thing was moving Microsoft from a mindset of or a culture of a know-it-all culture to a culture of learn it all, right? Moving it from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture, which eventually he translated into something he called the growth mindset, which required a lot more collaboration across Microsoft. It required a lot more working towards and focusing on the customer and dealing with that. And he would say that the 4 years he spent making that transition happen were the 4 hardest years of his life, right? And they learned those lessons, and he kind of made that lesson happen. And I can go on and on and on if you want, but maybe just 2 other things if I can just quickly call out. They also have a continuous learning mindset. Arvind Krishna at IBM will say, one of the problems with CEOs is they actually succeed in their first 3 years. They start believing in their own greatness, right? And they forget that the world moves and the world changes. And all of them, Arvind, Satya, Ajay, they keep looking externally for lessons. They keep talking with their customers to kind of get their lessons and the like. And the final thing I'll just call out is there is this thread of, and maybe this is part of the Indian heritage that helps this, there is a thread of servant leadership that runs through them. Robert Greenleaf in 1970 wrote the seminal essay called A Servant is a Leader. And many of these great Indian CEOs epitomize that because when you kind of dig into who they are and how they operate, Greenleaf defines great servant leaders as people who have unbelievable vision and perspective and a sense of purpose about where they wanted to go. But on the flip side, they're great listeners, they're authentic, they operate with humility, they believe in getting others to succeed. It is not about them, the institution's bigger than them, it's about helping others to succeed. And I think that thread runs through a lot of our great Indian CEOs as well.
That was fascinating. So I'm going to address a similar question to Meena, which is your book, the title is somewhat provocative, Indian Genius. And I know you didn't mean that Indians are the smartest people on the planet.
She did.
Although they may be. I think what you were getting at was an older, more literary meaning of the word genius, which is the distinctive characteristics of the Indian people and what makes them particularly special. So talk a little bit about what you profiled 15 people. In what way do they exemplify a sort of unique Indian genius, if you like?
So Indian Genius is a provocative title, and we've had this discussion at home a lot about over the last 3 years about what it is. It really is, actually what I'm talking about is the genius of the Indian people. And that is why my subtitle is very important, which is The Meteoric Rise of Indians in America. It sort of tells you it's not just about an individual, but it's about them as a people. Malcolm Gladwell, whom many of you may know his work, his theory is that, if you spend 10,000 hours doing anything, You can become a really good violinist, or you can really become a great soccer player, or whatever. And Angela Duckworth, who's another, she's an educational anthropologist. Her theory is, yes, but you have to have passion. But without passion, you're never going to really excel. And there's another book that's come out which is called The Myth of Genius, which Helen Lewis wrote, which I think is really important because the word genius is very loaded, and it sort of implies that it's a God-given gift that some of us have got and others can't hope to have, because it's been given by some kind of divine, decision. And so I think they've tried to get away from this whole concept of genius, which only applies to a few special people. So I actually really do think there are some people that somehow shine brighter amongst us than others. And so what was it? I was trying to probe and find out what it was. And I'm going to give you an example that I like to use, and that is Atul Gawande. Have you heard of him? I'm sure most of you have heard of him. So, I was looking for people. Look, there are a lot of rich, wealthy Indians, and one could write, an encyclopedia and not be done with them. But that wasn't what interested me. What I was looking for was people who were transformational in some way and had either had a huge impact on the field that they were working in and were transformational thinkers. Now, when you take Atul Gawande, this is a guy who, with his book, The Checklist Manifesto, brought infection rates down in hospitals by 60%. Now just think about what a huge impact that was. So across the medical community, he wasn't the one who actually came up with these 15 things that you have to do. There was someone else, there was another doctor scientist who had done it, but he's the one, by writing the book, by communicating it, and by making sure that it was adapted in his hospital, and then it was amplified by other people who because it worked, it became a thing. And so he had an enormous impact on medicine in this country. It was transformational. And he didn't have just one idea. He then came up with a second idea, which is his book, Being Mortal, which some of you may have read. And 90% or 90, something, I figure over 90% of healthcare costs in this country is used in the last 2 years of a person's life. And he was providing everyone with a different way of thinking about the end of life. Now, the medical community was quite ensconced in their way of doing things. It's hard to meet a doctor who doesn't think they can cure you. There's always something else, another treatment, another medicine, another surgery, and we'll fix you. But he said, let's step away from that thinking and look and see, what does the patient really want, and where does dignity derive from. So I think that, the fact that the medical community took this on and was able to change and look at alternative ways of dealing with the end of life was another very transformational act on his part. So I like to give his example because he's just so unique. And so it's people like that, and I'll give you another example. So I had someone who'd won the Nobel Prize recently in India, came to me and said, I'm not in your book. And I've been the chair for a little festival, and he said, that charlatan Deepak Chopra's in your book. Honestly, he said this to me. So I said, okay, you won the Nobel Prize, you don't need me to tell you you're a genius, the whole world says you're a genius, so be happy with that. But let me tell you why, when someone told me I should have Deepak Chopra in my book. And I was a little skeptical about, this airy-fairy, stuff, and I thought, let me, why? So this was a guy who was a national editor of the Washington Post. And he said his name was Rajiv Chandrasekharan. You might know of him because his book, Imperial Life in the Emerald City, was made into this movie, The Green Zone, with Matt Damon. Anyway, he said, listen, I was doing drug stakeouts when I was a reporter at the Washington Post, and I was in the hills of Virginia, and I was driving around with this guy who was like a real Trumpy guy, like white, rural, redneck, and he said he was complaining about his divorce, his wife, his custody, his mortgage payments, how he had, life was just crashing in on him. And, we're sitting in this very rural, sort of Appalachia type of place, and he says we're on our way to this, to get these drug guys and drug dealers. And he says, and then in the middle of this, he pops in a Deepak Chopra tape. And he said, I'm all chill now, man. and Rajiv is like, Deepak Chopra. He said, haven't you heard of him? You're an Indian. And so Rajiv is like so stunned because here in the middle of Virginia, the last thing he was expecting to hear was a Deepak Chopra tape. And so he said to me, this guy is not just in the salons of Beverly Hills. He's reaching people like this in rural areas of America. So, I came across several other examples of where people told me about how important Deepak Chopra had been in their life. Everyone from someone in the White House whose father had, was dying, and they were not Indian, and they went to Deepak Chopra, took their father to him, who helped him, in his last year of life, and the person at Starbucks who saw me reading the books, because I usually like to read everything before I go interview a person. And nobody knows Fareed Zakaria has written 7 books, and Sid Mukherjee has written 3 or 4. Deepak Chopra had written 90 books. I was thinking to myself, how am I going to read 90 books before I meet the guy? I didn't. I read a few. And a lot of it is based on the Bhagavad Gita. So it's actually that I actually found them quite compelling. And I talked to Abraham Verghese, who said, I asked Abraham, because they worked in the same hospital in Boston, and he said, he says, I find them compelling too. And he said, he is a really substantial guy. He was an endocrinologist in the hospital, highly respected. So, he knows what he's saying. And yoga used to be something in the 60s that was a hippie thing. Today, everyone is studying yoga in prisons and schools. Everyone's grandmother is studying it. So who made that a part of the American cultural landscape? It was Deepak Chopra getting on Oprah as a doctor, making alternative medicine acceptable in this country. So I think he deserved to be in the book.
So that was fascinating. So let's pivot to the Indian American community as a whole, and apart from the major successes. So it has gone from it's increased 100 times in the past 50 years, from 50,000 to 5.5 million. But that's beginning to pose some challenges to the so the first thing, let me ask you, Vic, maybe, do you know very much about the H-1B situation and how Indian Americans are having to cope with the greater restrictions on H-1Bs?
So before I get to that, I have to say Meena's story of the person who came up to her and said, why am I not in your book, really resonates. I can't tell you how many CEOs, both Indian and otherwise, have had come up to me and say, how come I'm not in your books? In my case, it's not 15, I've got 200 of them across 2 books. But you had to meet a certain set of criteria. When I explained the criteria to them, they're like, well, those are just the wrong criteria. It is amazing the hubris of people, just their own belief in their own greatness when they haven't demonstrated greatness. But anyway, I digress. I am no expert. I mean, I obviously understand the H-1B in terms of what it is and how it operates. For McKinsey, it's been a wonderful tool for us as we've employed people. I'm an expert in it, or fully get the dynamics of how this is going to play out. But I will say to you, as I talk to people, CEOs around the country, they are deeply concerned about it, right? I know we at McKinsey are concerned, but for us it was a piece, but not a be all and end all piece. When I talk to some tech CEOs, I even talk to some banking CEOs who have a large number of Indians working in the tech function, for example, within a bank or elsewhere. There is a rising concern around what this is going to mean for talent, right? Now, I have a view. It is uninformed by actual facts, but I have a view that actually the H-1B is at some level, kind of just an add-on to something that's actually been underway for 10 or 15, maybe even longer, right? At the tail end of the George W. Bush era, they started clamping back on immigration. It continued a little bit in Obama's world. It certainly was there in Trump 1. You saw it a little bit more in Biden. You're certainly seeing it big time again in Trump 2. So this is a trend that's been going on. And I often, when I think about Indian CEOs, or forget just CEOs, but even in the C-suite and all the many Indians, I mean, literally tens of thousands of Indians who are in the top echelons of many corporations around the United States, and many more middle market companies and the like. I wonder whether we've seen the peak. We've seen the peak of the greatness in terms of.
And do you think what are the implications for the growth of productivity and sort of in the U.S.?
Again, an uninformed and a personal.
No one can tell the future.
A personal view, but I would say that if there was genius in what happened in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the genius of the U.S. to be able to just get unbelievable talent in terms of
From everywhere.
from everywhere. But India just sheer size of numbers, right, relative to Poland or whatever. Just the sheer size of numbers that they were able to draw in. The productivity boom it created was enormous, right? And will the second and third generation that will come from many of those people who have settled here continue to help with the productification? Yes. But we also all know that invariably in immigrant communities you see a decline as that second, third, fourth generation kicks in, right? I mean, well documented, whether it's the Italian community, the Jewish community, and I'm sure it'll be true of the Indian community. And here was a unique ability, in my view, with the huge population in India, the huge amount of numbers of Indians that go to education, to kind of continue that trend and help U.S. productivity. And I think the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot on this.
Meena, you want to add anything?
Well, I think there's been rising discrimination as some Indians have started to feel. I've been on, this is sort of the end of my book tour almost. I've been on the road for a year with the book. And when I've been speaking in places like Silicon Valley and a lot of other places, a lot of people have told me, and this is very recently, it's just really since the last 3 months, that they're seeing a big uptick in anti-Indian sentiment. So, and they want to know, like, what should we do about it? Should we copy what the Jewish community has done and give money to educational institutions and do things and take an example out of their book? Should we keep our heads down? So everyone's concerned. If you look at the H-1B discussion, and if there's any discussion on the internet about H-1B, or you follow a newspaper article, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, and then you look at the commentary is quite racist, and particularly coming out of places like Texas. So I do think that there's been a spike, and and I think the Indian community is for the first time trying to grapple with this. I mean, there was a dot bashing incident, I think, in the 80s in New Jersey, but I think this is different. This is against people who are highly qualified, and people saying, we don't need them, send them back, they're taking American jobs. So,
Okay, I'm going to turn it over now because I'm sure there are lots of questions. That lady.
Hi. Hi, I'm Triveni. So one question I had from your research when you were writing the book is, all the Indians that you have written about, I haven't read the book, so I want to know if the values like hard work, agility, how is it getting transferred to the next generation? Because now I see like it's a testing period where most of them are immigrants, so they have this urge, they want to establish themselves. So how is that from your like research or what you see feeding into the next generation? Or would you just qualify them mostly as Americans, so you know you would make that distinction? How are you seeing that?
So, 60% of the Indians who are here, Indian Americans, are India born, because so many of them came after 2000. So they still have brought those values with them, and they still pretty much instill in their children the same competitive values that they were brought up with. So a lot of people have asked, what have I seen that is similar in some of the people that I've profiled? Who are what are the successful characteristics or characteristics of success? And one of the things that is common is they are risk takers, and I don't know if Vik will agree with me.
Absolutely.
But almost every one of these people were risk takers. You can't be scared of risk if you want to be this successful. And that is something that most Indians shy away from. We prefer the safe route. And I'm going to give you one interesting example. But you've all heard of the spelling bee?
Yes.
And I was at one time contemplating, because my publisher wanted me, that's the book they wanted me to write, the Indian version of the Tiger Mom, which I ended up saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pet myself with all these wonderful Indian families and then write horrible things about them and they'll hate me. So, no. But what I wanted to do was I did a matrix, and I sort of compiled a whole lot of information. I actually had a whole file because thought I might be writing this book. So I did a lot of research into it, spent 3-4 months, looking into things. And what I discovered was that, there was, many of you may have seen Spellbound or the movies, and if you remember, there was one engineer father who had created 300,000 Latin derivatives and names for the child to learn. Everyone in the family was helping the kids, and they didn't do anything else. The American kids were just either motivated by spelling or whatever. And the Indian kid who made it all the way to the end, and then he didn't make it, he failed on one word, and it was Darjeeling. Think of the irony of that. And you should have seen the horror on his parents' face. So, and then I looked to see, I said, do these kids, are they, with all this pressure, with all this stuff, learning Latin derivatives, getting French tutors and, all this stuff, do they actually become like some stars afterwards with all the achievement, even, the ones who win? And I looked at the winners, and most of them, some of them had become doctors, engineers, one became a poker player, and some of them are too young yet to know, but they actually they were not on some Nobel track. They weren't on any kind of track to win any great awards. So all this danda holding, I don't think all this pressure that you put your kids under is what leads to it, what leads to what these guys have achieved. And one of the things that all of them had in common, and they told me, was that their parents never got involved in their career path. I found that quite striking. So they said, Shantanu, he wanted to be a journalist, and his father, his older brother was the star, was the sort of gold medalist and this and that, and he was sort of the loser guy in the family. But look at him, and his parents gave him the freedom to discover what he was interested in, and his brother was a great mentor for him and very loving, and he said that, he actually told him when he came to the US, listen, if you don't buck up and start doing better in school or in college, you're going to get kicked out, you're going to lose your visa. And so Shantanu got so anxious about losing his visa, then he somehow hit on computers and graphics, and it really kicked in, he developed this passion. So you have to have that passion. And, it was similar as I'm looking at my characters, but many of them followed paths that were unconventional, but their parents didn't crowd them into studying. And so
the bottom line is anti-Tiger Mom. So we have a question here.
Every one of these people put in the 10,000 hours. I won't say that they didn't, because once they got obsessed, they were totally obsessed.
Okay, we've got lots of, we have
Okay.
lots of questions.
So this question is directed at Meenakshi, and before I articulate it, I want to be very clear, I'm not here to offend anybody in the Indian American community, but so even I, as an Indian American, am extremely proud of our community's success. There's no doubt about it. But there's also this thing, which we all know about, the South Asian American model minority myth. And I feel, again, that has been in some ways used to also perpetuate anti-Blackness in our community, which is not something I think we are comfortable talking about. I don't know if you've even seen what happened to Vik Ramaswamy talking to some of his Ohio constituents. I don't think they're too eager to have him as their governor. But I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on how this model minority myth of Indians has perpetuated some of these issues in our community? Because it's not all gold and honey, the whole Indian American success story also.
Absolutely. Whenever you have a community of 5 million people, you're going to have, both ends of the spectrum. And I've looked into this model minority thing. I think it's become sort of a cliche, and I hate getting into that argument, because obviously whenever there's a very large, substantial Indian community, there are going to be issues as well. There's this first generation and second generation issues. There's issues with their children. You just have to go on any blogs to see how many complaints about the way the parents are raising their kids who don't understand them in this American context. There's all kinds of stuff. But I think the more interesting and the more raw, if you really want to be honest, Mother Joffrey once said this to me a long time ago. I mean, I'm not any close friend of hers or anything, but at one time when I used to know her a little bit, she said, the thing about Indians, in England they're considered black, and here we're considered white. Mm-hmm. And this was way back. She wasn't saying that was a good or bad thing, by the way. I'm not trying to put any words in her mouth, but it was just, she was just saying, she was just making a statement of fact. And yes, I think she had a point, because when we were just 800,000 people in this country and highly accomplished and in all these great fields, I do think that somehow Indians blended in, and they were respected for what they did, and they began to think of themselves as part of the white community. So if you really want to be honest about our faults, we liked being part of the white community, and we accepted that, we thought that if we just go under the radar, we'll be fine. After all, what's common amongst all these people? Everyone's upper caste. 80% of the people in this country are upper caste. So they came from this upper caste mentality from India, and their view was, we're basically white. And So now it's come as a big shock to them because there are 5 million Indians. I mean, you're 5 million, you are brown. You are like a big brown community. And I think we have to readjust our heads. And so I think the other thing, what we have not done, and a very interesting guy in Silicon Valley at a meeting that we had within Diaspora, he pointed this out. He said, we've been giving money to Stanford and all these places, but we haven't actually held hands with any minority communities in this country. And I said, we should not be giving money to Stanford. Mukesh Ambani is already funding Stanford, and we should not be giving money to these places because all we're trying to do is make sure our kids can go there. I said, if you're going to live in North Carolina, give money to the community college there. Give money to the local free clinic there. That's what's going to bring you in, as into the community and become friends with them. And I said, yes, if you're not going to identify with black discrimination or Hispanic discrimination or anything else, don't be surprised if today you're discriminated against and they're not interested in you. So that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, question that I'm conscious that we don't want to just pick the front. Two more. So, yeah, two more. Okay.
I didn't read your book, but is there a industry concentration that's more predominant in terms of people that are listed in your book in terms of the success that they've had, like technology, or is it you have across the board?
I picked 3 areas where I thought Indians have had a big impact: medicine, tech, and increasingly public policy. So the Zorans and the Nikki Haley's and but this is really the new generation, the kind of generation that is now born here, wants a stake in this country, and is making a name for themselves.
If I could just add to that, if you look at the business community, it is true that just given the nature of how many of the people who are now, 65% came from India, they came with tech skills. So you do see a dominant number of them in the technology community. But I would not underestimate the impact that Indians in corporate America have had in the banking community, in the healthcare community, in the healthcare, by that I mean the business community, not just being doctors. And you actually see a lot of them in what I'll call the advanced industrial world, right? When you get into companies that are making stuff, again, just given the importance of technology, it's a very prevalent and dominant pattern in terms of the number of senior Indians and lots and lots of businesses across the board at this point.
There is a person who I've covered who is in corporate America, by the way, Chandrika Tandon. And a lot of people ask me why her sister Ranui isn't in it, that she is, and I have an answer for that, but at another time because I think we're going to run out of time.
Okay, so we have one more question, that gentleman.
Yes, I'm just going to come to the topics of these 2 books, and the fundamental question is that I think we're just talking about the genius from India and the US. My question is that, as an example, if Satya Nadella were to stay in India, would you really see him rise to the level that he has, what he's accomplished here?
I think that's a really
why don't we
interesting
direct that
question.
to
Yeah, big, and yeah.
So again, this is all conjecture. My own view is that prior to the opening up of India, if you'd had the same talent in India, kind of pre-1990, it would have been stifled, right? The license Raj and everything that occurred in India would not have allowed this talent to rise to the top. I do believe in today's India, or the India of the last 20 years or 25 years, that this talent that, should perhaps rightly have stayed in India would have had the same kind of impact in India that they've had here. That is my view for what it's worth.
Great. Do we have time for one more? One more. Okay. The lady, yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Vik regarding gender. Does your research show anything about the low numbers of the Indian American CEOs, women?
I would tell you that it is a pervasive issue across both whites, blacks, Indians, in terms of women rising to the top, in terms of being CEOs. This is the whole trap of the funnel, if you like, because actually when you go down into corporate America, you get as many women as men entering corporate America. But as the funnel narrows towards the top, for a variety of reasons, we don't have time today just now to get into it, they get squeezed out quite dramatically. And even when they get to the C-suite level, they tend to get directed towards being the chief human resources officer or the chief of staff and the like, as opposed to taking on business unit leadership roles. So I don't see a huge difference between Indian women and non-Indian women, but it is a major issue that corporate America has not come to grips with yet.
Great, thank you. I am going to do a vote of thanks and give some closing comments, but before I do want to give an opportunity to our chairman of IIC, Dr. Malhotra. You have a question.
There seems to be some preoccupation with this word genius. It's a very cheap commodity. 2% people on the planet have IQ over 135, and 1.5% are over 140. They are classified by statistics and by measurement as geniuses. So in this world, there are about anywhere from 120 million people to 160 million people that are geniuses. So there are less, I'm a Kashmiri, there are less Kashmiri speaking people than geniuses. There are less green-eyed people than geniuses. So it is something more than that. Geniuses are walking all over, every place. The question of what makes them successful, I think that there is something about India, poor country and everything, but even when we developed this horrible caste system, we put Brahmins on top. They didn't have money. The value of scholarship from thousands of years has been valued very high as compared to other societies in which you could buy that scholarship. You need a doctor, you don't have to go to medical school, you pay him $50 and he'll take care of you. And Charlemagne, who converted whole Europe, started reading and writing at age 45. Most of the women here could not read or write in this country. So I think the focus has to be some other elements that have created this kind of bright people. So it's not just there. The genius is in every part of the world, walking around, and can't even buy anything. So I think we're looking everybody has the same level of intelligence in the world, percentage, depending on where. So I'm a little bit, I question that, even that attitude that we have more geniuses in India, or we are somehow better intellectuals. It's not that way. Statistics and numbers and everything do not support.
So, Raju, McKinsey, every literary festival, this is the panel that I really wish could go on, because it is so deep and so important. And I would urge you, if there are 2 books to buy and read, please buy these books. Give them to your children to read. I want to just add 2 comments, one directed at you, Vik, and one to you, Meena. Vik, for you, I was privileged that I was amongst the first 5 Indians who cracked the glass ceiling and became CEO of Fortune 500 company. The other names, Rajat Gupta, who was in the room next to me in Aravali Hostel. So I know Rajat from 1972. Shailesh Mehta, Providio. Ramni Iyer, Hartford Insurance. So I have a little bit of perspective of what traits helped us penetrate. And this addresses, Dr. Bhattu, your question. We would get together, we would talk, because there was nobody else to talk about the loneliness we felt as Indian CEOs. So the first thing was this. In each case, the board of directors picked us up because they felt that the company was going to go in a very high-risk situation. High risk. We didn't take high risks. We were handed a mandate of high risks. Now, why did they pick us? Why did they pick us? They picked us, my submission is, for the following reasons. Number one, absolute total grit. They sensed in us that we had come from a process of fire that had steeled us, more so than our American counterparts. The second reason, if you examine each one of those early CEOs, we always thought beyond the company. We always had a worldview. Our philanthropy, our roles that we played were global. And the third thing will astonish you. We set up little groups. The first group was in San Francisco, the second group was in New York. The names we gave these two groups was very interesting. We didn't call this group the Indo-American Chamber or any of this. No. The San Francisco group of Indian leaders, we gave the name NNL, No Name Luncheon. And in New York, all these people that you know, that has never been revealed, we called it the US group. US. So the psyche of these people who broke through was very different. Now, Meena, for you, I tell you, I was so delighted when you shared some of the stories. We do not understand how profoundly we owe a debt to the black community of America. We have no appreciation. In this excellence, we have not understood the soil of America that accepted us. It was not America, it was Harlem. Go back and look at our history. I had the biggest Indian organization that has served 2 billion meals come and ask me, they said, we want to expand our mission of free meals. What name should we give it? Because you know America. And then said, we're planning on locating all this stuff here. I said, no, locate it in Harlem. When we came to America, we came as a black people. The first Indian who came to America was a man named Tony in Virginia. He was brought as a slave. And if there's one thing we have to do, it is to understand that we came and we were welcomed and embraced by black people. I went to the first Indian restaurant in America in Harlem that is not documented. The first people who ate Indian food in America were black people. So with that, all I want to say to you is keep digging into your stories about our leadership, our history, and I do agree with Dr. Mattu that there is something special about us. And let us try to understand it, because it's a great story. Thank you.